Hello Northlanders! Last week, the Duluth News Tribune released its 62nd episode of the Northlandia podcast, a bi-weekly podcast which tells true stories of the unique and fascinating people and places you'll find exploring the Northland. In this latest episode, reporter Jimmy Lovern takes us inside the stone fortress of Douglas County that is currently for sale.
It is like you're driving down that dead-end road, and at the end of the road, there's like several tiers of retaining wall made out of rock stacked there, and then there's a for sale sign there, and then you pull around the other side of it and you come across a house. There's a house built into that hill that retaining wall is kind of carved up, and it's using the same rock that those retaining walls are for the entire house. And then kind of the lawn kind of turns into the roof, so it's a slanted concrete, rubber over concrete roof with grass planted on top, so it's unclear where the roof stops and the yard begins.
To give you an opportunity to see what stories Northlandia has to offer, we're providing the 56th episode here for you to listen. This episode was originally published April 23rd. If you enjoyed the episode, we encourage you to check out all the other episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Enjoy. Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity, because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner with the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we look at how a Duluth park is connected to the Apollo 11 mission. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to help us dig further into the unique parks in Duluth, how they seem to have these weird connections and weird happenings going on with them, is News Tribune reporter Jimmy Lovern.
Hello, Wyatt.
Now, not to say this is a common occurrence, but it's happened a couple times now. We've talked about parks or areas around Duluth, but now here we are again talking about Quarry Park in West Duluth. So what's up with Quarry Park, and what prompted you to look at this one?
Right. So Quarry Park, one of the newest park, if not the newest park in Duluth, established formally in 2016. Old stone quarry that there's a 1,000-foot long, 100-foot high rock wall, very popular for ice climbing. So that's what Quarry Park is. And where the idea came from was from our managing editor, Katie Roman, who said that she had heard scientists collect rock from the quarry and then use it for study of lunar surfaces. It shares the properties with the moon, so NASA likes that. And so I was intrigued by that. I had never heard that. I live almost right next to Quarry Park. I can see it from my window, and I had never heard that. And as I was doing research, there really was not much out there about that. There was some, but I wanted to know more. And there are not a whole lot of people around anymore that know about it, but yeah, it's true.
So this wasn't one of those park stories where you're just happen to be walking through the parks as you often do, since you like to hike around parks and such, where there's a plaque there just laying out, hey, this happened here.
Right. There's not that. Yeah. So that's not it's mentioned a little bit in the mini master plan that the city put together, when they're kind of planning out this, at the time, a future city park. It's like a paragraph. And that's really the only mention of it from the city. Yeah, there is no plaque. Only other sources out there, and are studies and research papers that kind of reference MLS-1, which is Minnesota Lunar Simulant 1, which again is kind of just referenced as found in an abandoned quarry by a University of Minnesota researcher, so geologist. So yeah, not a whole lot out there, but I kind of got what I could, and then I was pestering folks down at the Johnson Space Center in Texas, where they have a lab that they still do, because they want to get back to the moon, and so they use, artificially made moon rock and dust samples to test everything, and so they still do that. And so I reached out to the guy who leads that lab, and I actually just got off the phone with him, who was very helpful and had kind of read up on MLS-1, and it was not just an early simulant of the lunar surface, it was the first simulant that was created, made out of Earth stuff from here that could then, share characteristics of the moon surface, and then researchers could then try anything and everything with it in their experiments. So but it's kind of run out. They got about a ton of it, so 2,000 pounds of it, and there hasn't really been any since. That's because they found other sources that share similar properties, and also where they're thinking about going back to the moon, from what I understand, is a different type of rock. So they're a little bit more interested in a different type of rock now. But this basalt with titanium in it, it shares characteristics of the dust that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would have taken back with them on Apollo 11, the first people on the moon. So Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, they are taking rock samples and putting them in containers and fill the void space between the rocks with this dust called regolith. And they load that up. It's considered sample 10084, I believe. And, come 20 years later, it seems to match, this rock that this geologist found in Duluth's Quarry Park. So began to kind of pulverize and, create a dust that replicate, same, kind of grains as the, or as close as you can of what was sampled by Apollo 11. But, and so it was the first to do that. There's a lot of them out there now. There's companies that just do this. You can order them yourself, not this, but, from elsewhere, whether that be, the desert somewhere, but anywhere where there's that lava flow and there's basalt with some titanium in it is really useful. So again, this is a basalt in it, and it had ilmenite in it. And that is a titanium iron oxide mineral that actually north of here, they are looking at mining because of its titanium content. Anyway, this quarry, there's a narrow black band of this basalt that is characteristically very similar in many ways to the moon's surface after it's been ground up. And so it was the first, and it kind of set off going on 36 years of, research where they kind of test anything and everything that might need to happen, I suppose, on the moon. So that's this space scientist from Johnson Space Center. His name is John Gruner. And he said that like hinges, or seals, anything like that might be, how does it interact once a dust gets in there, and anything like that. And then actually originally, the first Bush, George H. Bush, kind of had set out a call to get back to the moon on the 20th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission. And the idea was to be able to, long-term stays, kind of like the goal is now, have kind of an outpost on the moon. And so they wanted to figure out how to strip the oxygen from the moon surface. I guess from what I learned 20 minutes ago, if you just hit it with a hydrogen, I'm oversimplifying it, you can strip the oxygen from the rock and then use that potentially. They were hoping, to breathe, right? And so that's kind of where this first came from. Yeah, and so the black band of basalt is what we're talking about here. It was, a ton of it was taken from Quarry Park, made into MLS1, and it was the first simulant. And, since then, it has run out and is no longer available for researchers to use, but there's an industry around this. I mean, there's companies that provide lunar simulants sourced elsewhere, but they have, made their own. And so anyway, below that black line of basalt, there's apparently a white rock kind of stretching across, and that is northesite, which is a different mineral, which is also found on the moon. And it is more similar to where they want to, today, where they want to send Artemis missions for an outpost on the moon on the South Pole. That's where their simulants that they're using now are now northesite. However, they never took any of that for that reason from Quarry Park. And so the scientist, John Gruner, he was kind of saying, like, you got the whole moon right there. You've got the valleys and craters, and you've got kind of the other areas, and it's all right there. The black band and the white band, boom, right there in Quarry Park. So yeah, before, I'm glad I spoke to him, because what I was finding online was fairly limited, and it was fun to talk to a scientist who was very excited about this, and he had actually never seen photos of the wall, so I'm going to email him some. But he's relying on kind of old drawings and research studies from like 1988ish when this was first happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, there'll be more information online now after this, you know?
Exactly, yes.
Like that's happened a few times with Northlandia stories. The one off the top of my head was like Luther and Razzleberry. There was like nothing online about them two either.
Right.
Until we did an article on them. Not that those two are related in any way besides the Northlandia banner.
Right.
I think you just took me on like I attended a college lecture or like a student presentation minus like the visuals. Although listeners, I want you to imagine Jimmy's very expressive with his hands. You can't get that in podcast form, but he's like, as he described these minerals, he's like stretching out his hands and such. And like we're doing it right now. You can't see it at all. You just have to use your imagination that
you'll just have to go and stand in front of the wall at Quarry Park and do that. And I mean, yeah, it just looked like you were warming up to climb it or something maybe. But no, it was interesting. And you'll have to send this to me, make sure I'm getting things right because I've, again, got off the phone with this guy like 5 minutes before, right before I came in here. And I'm pretty pumped just because I knew this was a thing, but this is the fact that it was the first and the fact that it really kind of set off the idea that better or more sourced, I don't know if better is the right word, but following stimulants, would be on their way. That would really fascinate me.
Mm-hmm. And you've already touched on a little bit about how, there's not a whole lot of information out there, so finding the source is a little more challenging. You talked a little bit more about how you went about putting together the story. Obviously, you talked the one gentleman.
Yeah, so there's a lot of like these open source papers and other research that cite Paul Whelan of the University of Minnesota, geologist, who is credited with piecing together that this thing that he found in Quarry Park matches up with the lunar surface and then developing a way to grind it down. And so he developed MLS-1. And so there are all these, the original research papers are referenced and cited and not open access. So Gruner has graciously sent me those, and I'm interested in looking through those now and kind of finding out more about that process. But even for him.
So there's still more for you to learn right now.
Exactly.
That you're going to dive into. And so listeners, I encourage you, because we're recording this a little earlier than we normally do, if you want to learn more, possibly check out the article.
Right.
Jimmy's going to dive into more information. He might have some more information that we weren't able to cover here in the podcast prior to you diving into that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think speaks to that there's probably not a whole lot out there. I mean, it was the first, but that Paul Whelan has since died, and some of the other researchers, at that era are no longer around. So John Gruner was kind of saying, he's like, I was reading up on this before we talked, but he kind of refamiliarized himself, and he's like, I'll send you what I got, but it's not much. It's a handful of PDFs that he sent. I see about 5. I saw a couple of those ones online, but I think a lot of them, were the ones I couldn't access. And so, yeah, it's not a whole lot out there about that. So it makes sense that really the city of Duluth only had that paragraph in their master study. And then when I reached out to the city to be like, hey, do they still come looking for this rock? Does anyone know anything about this? They're kind of like, yeah, no one knows, no one has firsthand knowledge of it. Kind of like they heard the same thing, they know the same thing, but no one's dealt with it. So no one was like wanting to talk about, comfortable talking about it.
I think we're lacking some of the Duluth pride on this whole thing. You think if this happened today, we'd be like planting our, we did this, we had our rocks taken and used to go to the moon.
Right.
Any connection at all, I feel like we would jump on. So I'm a little surprised that there's, besides a one paragraph in the master plan.
Right.
Not even a plaque at the park.
I know. Well, maybe that'll change. Maybe we can force some change for good. I mean, if we can build, again, going back to a past episode, a memorial park for the first paved road in Duluth, I think we can honor the first lunar simulant to be used. But no, it's really kind of cool to think that they're not using MLS-1 now, but they're wanting to get back to the moon, and they're using other simulants that are kind of born out of the processes and stuff that Paul Whelan of the University of Minnesota kind of first figured out. 35, it's kind of interesting that, today they're using other simulants, not MLS-1, but compared to 35, 36 years ago when Paul Whelan developed MLS-1, it's evolved, but ultimately its roots are here in Quarry Park and at the University of Minnesota. So yeah, you'd think, we always talk about the, Post-it note and Bob Dylan and Prince and I don't know what other inventions.
Pizza rolls.
Yeah, pizza rolls.
Which I also didn't know about.
Yeah.
We got better prioritizing what cool things we've done in Duluth.
Right. Yeah, we've got something that matches the sample Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin collected in 1969 their first men on the moon, right? I mean, that came back with a sample that is very close to what we have in our backyard. And that's because, I guess we haven't talked about this in the podcast, but in my other coverage covering mining, it's a result of these volcanic flows that happen when the continent tried to rip itself apart. Lava comes up. It leaves behind all these minerals like copper, nickel, ilmenite, that are being eyed now for extraction, right? There's a industry that is, trying to get permitted and wants to process these minerals. And we've known that they've been there for a while, but yeah, to know that it had this other use is really interesting, that it replicates the moon is, kind of mind-blowing in a lot of ways. I should say it shares many of the characteristics minus the presence of glass. So on the moon, there's glass within the regolith dust soil that was collected. And so again, Paul Whelan kind of figured out a way to like plasma torch this and create glass out of it.
As you would.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so instead of, the glass being formed as impacts of space debris and everything are hitting the moon and creating that, I guess he found a way to kind of modify this and get that in there as well. So it closer matched, what was actually found on the moon.
So now I'm gonna be looking for this for like any future
Yes.
movies made, TV shows, whatever, about like going to the moon and all of our space explorations. I can't think of a single reference to Duluth's Quarry Park. So I fully expect to see that now in the future in some regard.
I hope
we have
so,
movies filming here. They can film there.
Right, right. And I'm looking at, I'm gonna send him some photos I took today, and maybe the shadows aren't the best, but I'm looking at that photos of the wall and I see some light stuff. Maybe that's the northicite he talked about. I don't see the black band of basalt, but maybe he'll have an idea and be able to point it out. Or he sent me some research papers that I guess have some crude drawings that show it, that maybe we can match them up. But yeah, it's a quarry, from 120 years ago. And so it's hard to tell what was dug 35 years ago versus 100 years ago. So I don't really know where it's taken place, but it'd be kind of interesting to know. I don't think there's a risk of people going out there and collecting it and grinding it up themselves, because it's, takes a real specific process, and then, plasma torching it. Yeah, I don't think there's a real risk of people going out there and creating some black market MLS1. One other thing I learned is that the University of Minnesota Duluth Natural Resources Research Institute, NRRI, they're actually still doing research not on MLS1 but on the grinding process to create simulants. So they've got a lab where they work with the taconite industry and other mining, other minerals, of how to process them, and there's a lot of grinding in that process. And so they also, I learned in the process, have just as recently as a year or two ago, were processing, figuring out ways to grind up and create simulants along with a school in Michigan. So yeah, another connection to the Northland. Of course, not just with this mineral, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so we've touched on it a little bit, but now how is Quarry Park utilized today? We've already mentioned known for some ice climbing. Our colleague Dan Williamson actually put together a photos and video piece a while back in the winter. I think it was St. Scholastica students, our alma mater, climbing the walls there. You can check out that story on our website. But what else is the park utilized for now?
Yeah, so there's hiking trails, biking trails, and disc golf. And like I said, it's new as an official city park, 2016, whereas it had been kind of an unofficial recreation space for decades before that. Ice climbing, from what I understand, people in the 70s kind of realized, wow, this rock face has a lot of water coming down that freezes. Let's climb it. And so it became like a destination, and then out of that grew a park, kind of unofficially at first, known as Casket Quarry Park. It's near a cemetery. There are vaults left at the entrance. So like if you walk in, there are concrete burial vaults and then some metal lids just off the trail. They built stairs out of them. And then there's the ruins of the quarry's grinding plant. So they'd break down the rock and send it off for, road construction and other construction materials in Duluth. Primarily, I mean, I'm sure the area, but I think a lot of Duluth used it for paving the roads, building foundations, everything like that. I don't exactly know when the quarry itself closed, but it started in 1903, and I'm guessing by the mid-century it was pretty well wrapped up. Kind of left abandoned, but then people found their way into it, and has recently been formalized into a park.
I'm trying to resist the urge to dive into this whole vaults thing. That sounds like a whole spin-off story, unrelated kind of.
Exactly.
Maybe we'll go down that a different time.
I think that's going to be a future Northlandia, because we're trying to figure it out too. And I have an origin story that I always thought was a thing that I don't know is a thing. It's not out there, but that doesn't mean, could be something like this where it's, someone out there knows a lot about it and could speak to it, kind of like this.
And if you're listening to this, please reach out and tell us.
You know why there are vaults there. Was it left over from the cemetery? Was there a factory of burial vaults there at one time? I don't know. If you do, let me know.
Mm-hmm. And taking it back to the subject at hand with its connection to NASA and the Apollo 11 mission, why do you think this specific story with Quarry Park fits in our realm of Northlandia? As you know, we're venturing beyond just the implications of the Northland, like literally carrying out into space.
Right. Yeah, I think the unknown of it, of it really being just a paragraph out there, kind of rewritten a few different ways in different studies, and one paragraph on the city's website. I mean, and then finding out that it is in fact true. This also was the first simulant, and here's how they're used today. I mean, to me, it's just kind of a little bit mind blowing and cool, and I think our readers will share that. That something in our backyard is like that. I don't know. I think it's just the wow factor. Sometimes we've got the weird factor on Northlandia. I think this is the wow factor. So the unknown, surprising kind of a quality to it.
Yeah. I mean, add that to the list of things I did not know about Duluth.
Exactly.
Why is that not more widely talked about?
Right.
I don't know. Add that with pizza rolls.
Exactly.
Not quite as high as pizza rolls, but in terms of shock factor, at least. At least for me.
I mean, this would be a question for Astro Bob, retired News Tribune photographer and current columnist. There's a area on Mars named Duluth. And beyond that, I don't have any details. But
what?
Duluth, there's Duluth, Georgia, and then there's Duluth, Mars.
Oh.
So I don't know. And so like kind of looking at this stuff at first and like looking up NASA and Duluth and kind of different research terms, I kept coming back to the area on Mars that's Duluth.
We might have to bring him on here and talk about that. But
Probably.
again, that's a separate story.
I think he's gonna. If anyone gets there, it'll be him.
All right, Jimmy, thank you so much for bringing this here. And I feel like I learned a lot today. Definitely a lot I didn't know about Duluth and even just about NASA and how I guess that is something they'd have to look into. I feel like I learned a lot today, and I'm hoping that we can spur off a couple stories from this.
Exactly. I learned a lot, 30 minutes ago, and I'm glad I could relay that on. It was fresh in my mind. So,
and I'm excited to read your article as well, since you'll have more time to dive into more research materials.
Yeah.
And again, listeners, if you want to potentially learn more, I can't say definitively that there's more information in the article than we talked about, but there could be.
Yeah. John Gruner, he said he's going to send me a photo of MLS1. So they've still, they don't use it for research anymore because there's not a source of it, right? It's limited, but I guess they've got a sample somewhere and they're still at Johnson Space Center. And he said, he's going to send me a photo of it. So you can see what it looks like.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jimmy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, as well as see photos, visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/topics/Northlandia. There you can find all the episodes of Northlandia, as well as on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoy this episode and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber of the Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss when you're on the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.